Now, to unpack all these issues, I'm joined here in studio by Dr. Amaleya Malka from the University of Pretoria and Toko Mpumlwana of the Commission for Gender Equality. Ladies, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Happy Women's Day, first of all. Thank you very much. Without a doubt, so much progress has been made since 1994. We're seeing women visible in almost all spheres in this country, but we're not there yet. Dr. Malka.
Well, no, we're not yet there yet, and I think that we'd only be there when we consider that our population comprises of 52% women versus 48% men. Until we're at an equality ratio within all spheres of industry, be it on our government sector or private sector, I think that's the aim that we have to strive for. The Minister declared today that we are on 44% composition within Parliament, which I think is absolutely significant and showing serious gains. And in fact, if you look at the Interparliamentary Union, South Africa is ranked as 8th in the world. And interestingly, I think Rwanda is ranked first in the world with 56% female representation. And I think that's a wonderful achievement, and I'm very proud of South Africa for delivering on that. But I think that those figures need to be represented across all sectors of society, and being given that from a parliamentary point of view, that we're now in a position of power where we've got the possibility to change laws, to effect that change, that's what we need to see more of and take that forward in progression. If we look at some of the statistics produced by the Businesswomen's Association, their census in 2012, they've indicated that on a business point of view, we've only got 21.4% executive management. And shockingly, when it comes to the representation of CEOs on the JSE, it's only at 3.6 of female representation. So these are obviously areas that we need to strive forwards to achieve and break through glass ceilings.
What about implementation? We've got wonderful legislation, we have a wonderful constitution. Yes, progress has been made, but implementation, is that what the problem is here? Dr. Malka, you might want to touch on that one.
Yes, implementation is certainly an area that needs to happen, and I think South Africa is very progressive in terms of what it's done. If we think from a BEE point of view, we've established quotas and gone through and implemented them. And we've set targets and timeframes, and the same in any business or any organization. When you set down your targets, you go and you deliver and you achieve them. And possibly that's one of the issues that needs to be to come through and be implemented, is having set targets and set timeframes. We have it with the mining charter adherence, and those are areas that need to be implemented. I think it was Norway, for instance, they're on a 40% representation of female across sectors. In Sweden, they were looking at increasing from 25 to 30% by 2011. So they're setting specific targets. And these are the targets that we need to start delivering on, and having possibly punitive damages if they're not adhered to, so that people are, in a way, forced to make things happen. I think it's fairly ironic that 82%, according to the labour stats, of women in employment are actually in low, underskilled paying positions. And those are things that need to change. We are 58% of account for the graduates enrolled in universities. So women are more educated than their male counterparts.
But that does speak to education. I want to refer to a survey recently done by the research firm Ipsos that found that 18% of people it surveyed say the right to education is a male prerogative. Attitude, is this really how society thinks?
It starts from the home, Griselda. Starts from the home, where patriarchy says a male child has more opportunities. A male child is likely to keep this family running, and so the tendency is to give more attention to male children. Then go to schools. More attention is given to boys, and we are grateful that more girl children now, with the legislation we have in place and the positive attitude of government, more efforts are being made to address the girl child, and more are graduating at high school. But if you consider how many actually reach matric in South Africa, that's also part of the problem. There's a high dropout rate in South Africa, and a high unemployment rate of young people, and those are issues we need to deal with as a country. And I agree that we need to set quotas for ourselves, and there has to come a time when we have to penalize as a nation people who don't adhere to commitments that they make themselves as entities, and then they don't meet those commitments. Take disability. All the legislation says minimum 2%, but how many are meeting the minimum 2% in the country? So there is a sense of impunity, there is a sense of people wanting to be pushed to do what is right.
You did a presentation in the United States, Dr. Malka, just a couple of months ago. I want to speak to that aspect of paying more attention to the girl child. In that presentation, you also highlighted the fact that still very much so in the South African society, the mindset is still that the girl child in some areas still belongs in the kitchen.
Well, that was part of it, and that's part
Yes.
of building on a discussion.
Yes.
We have got so many factors. There isn't a one set solution to anything. If we're dealing with it from, as Toko was saying, from in the home, your cultural upbringing. When you go into the workplace, you may have a very neutral workplace, but when you go back into the home, you're still facing your cultural issues. So you are applying possibly 2 or more different identity sets when you're there. Dealing with issues of teen pregnancy, dealing with issues of violence, looking at having proper role models in place, women who have broken through glass ceilings and represent an ideology that other women can follow in their footsteps. And I think that's one of the very important factors of how we're celebrating Women's Day, on what our women in 1956 did in terms of utilizing their power and their right and their vote to implement change. And I think that people should really appreciate what they've done. And we are now in a democracy, and we need to start exercising and utilizing our rights to make change and drive change and be progressive about it.
But how do we do that, Dr. Malka, when I refer to this survey again? I found it quite shocking, where the people that were surveyed, 27% felt that certain jobs should actually go to men and not to women. Perhaps on the backdrop that men can do it and women cannot. How do you do that when you walk into a society where there's still that kind of thinking, there's still that kind of attitude?
Well, I haven't seen the survey, so I can't
Yes.
account for how they did it,
Yes.
what representation it was, who the sample was, how many people were surveyed. So it's difficult to gauge in terms of who those perceptions are. Was it male perceptions? Was it female perceptions, thinking they shouldn't be in these frames of jobs? I think that is very narrow thinking, and it's about looking at our systems and being able to make that transformation. So if I revert back to the work that I was doing, this is looking at taking an amalgamation of being able to incorporate all of the external factors that we have working for us, be that from a legislation point of view, constitution, as well as internal factors. And more importantly, from an internal factor, it's about women driving and affecting change for themselves through education, because education delivers their choices.
All right, Dr. Malka, I think let's just start there. The last surviving of the Union Buildings March, saying that, of the women that went to the Union Buildings, saying that influence from the home, parents not paying attention about the kind of attitudes that they give off towards their children. Dr. Malka?
Yes, absolutely. I think it starts in the home, and it goes out in terms of your relative experiences that you're exposed to. And these are ideals which I think even included in the new Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill. It's about changing perceptions of men as well as women of each other, and looking at altering and changing our roles and how we play and trade in society. But the fundamentals absolutely start at home, and those are things that need to be taken care of.
Sister Togo, you look like you want to add that. Granted. Dr. Malka, I want to come back to that 27% that we spoke of the survey, the Ipsos survey, where that 27% believed that jobs should actually go to men rather than women. You wanted to continue on that.
Well, I think that in itself, if that's what the statistic says, is that already it shows that there are some misconceptions that need to be addressed in society of how someone can think that 27% of jobs should not go to women, that they should automatically be allocated to men. And that goes back to, as Toko was talking about, in terms of building through on fundamental values and support systems and structures, on being able to change mindsets. And it goes across from dealing with culture, dealing with education, addressing differences in tradition, differences in religion, and looking at those different value systems. And those are parts which need to be educated, not just within the home, but educated in the school, educated in any environment, and having appropriate role models in place to dissipate and distribute that knowledge, so that we have a realization of equality between men and women in terms of what they do and what their perspectives are. And I think it'd be interesting to possibly run those studies across different sectors of society to see how the results duplicate or differ.
Dr. Malka, you actually touched on some of that as well with the presentation that you gave in the United States with regard to culture. I know you spoke about an issues of uktwala as well, where that presentation, some of the challenges that are affecting, that don't change these perceptions on towards women, and no matter how far we've come.
Yes, I mean, those are really, it's the reality that we live in. And I think particularly more so affecting rural women. And I think if my stats are correct, we're approximately about 50% urban to 50% rural women. And in the rural communities, they've got even less say in terms of their binding and having to adhere to patriarchy. And those, I think you've really touched on those issues of how patriarchy affects. So whether there's things like primogeniture, which is the succession along a male inheritance line, so that women, you may be married, you may have accumulated your wealth, but if your husband dies, well, it goes through to the next male line. You don't get any benefit out of it. And those are fundamentals that have to change. And it's a very sensitive issue, raising between looking at what may be constitutionally right, what is constitutionally right, and what your culture is saying. Those are conflicts and tensions which come through.
So do you think not enough emphasis is being put on the rural woman?
Not necessarily. I think that we see those effects happening throughout society, but I think rural women possibly have a harder time of it because they have got less access to resources, whether it be from a court's point of view, whether it be from an education point of view. And education is not just from a formal sense in terms of what you're acquiring academically, but it's your whole knowledge base of, well, what actually are my rights? Am I aware of my constitution? Then it's financial concerns with resources, looking at land. Land is another huge issue from a rural point of view.
That's right. Dr. Malka will come. Just before we went to Gillian, we were speaking about patriarchy, what needs to happen in the workplace to ensure that women are able to use particular tools to protect themselves from those in power, if whether it be gentlemen, whether it be women. But corporate governance should be one of the critical issues put in place, Dr. Malka.
Yes, I mean, any good corporation will have a corporate governance and policies from human resource point of view, governing how the organization operates, what needs to happen, how behavior is expected of them, what the culture is of the organization. There should be an induction process, socialization into the company or the corporation, and what the rules of operations are, because I mean, we've already spoken about the fact that culture can differ in the home, culture can differ in the workplace, and it's about utilizing the rules that operate within that workplace, and these are the rules that need to be abided to by people whilst they're working in that company or corporation. And I think it's interesting, if we almost look at different organizations, and in essence they're almost micro-governments in themselves, as microcosms of how works and operations occur. And you need to understand what your roles are, what your regulations are, and to report things and to have a safe environment. As Dr. was saying, it's knowing who to go to, knowing what the issues are, knowing what the boundaries are of crossing, and what is the definition of sexual harassment. And those are ways in which we protect ourselves as well as our colleagues and other employees to ensure that we work to our best ability and that we are protected and the company's protected as well.
Apart from a good corporate governance and what companies themselves can do to ensure that employees are safe, how do you protect then yourself as a woman in that environment? You're up against someone who's a decision maker, somebody who can either make or break whether you go forward, as some women would look at it. What can you do to protect yourself?
Well, it's raising the issues. You've got that, as we've got a constitution, a government constitution, which would protect you constitutionally. You've got the legislation within the organization. and it's following through. And as we had the professor talking about, it's activating your voice, it's activating your right. It's not standing down. You've got your own self-dignity, your own self-worth, your respect, and doing what's right. And I think that's, in essence, that goes back to why we're celebrating Women's Day. It's about doing what's right. Those women fought against the passes. It was incorrect. And we need to activate our voice, activate our votes, bring to light any discrepancies that are occurring, and deal with them and address them. Otherwise it goes back to almost like we were talking about with the constitutional, so the gender violence-based courts.
Yeah.
We've got those bodies in place. We need to utilize them. They're there to serve a purpose, and that's the purpose, and the correct channel to address and raise those concerns and issues, to prevent things from happening, not only to you as an individual, but also to your other colleagues. And so issues don't escalate.
We're celebrating today centenary, looking back to the first march in Bloemfontein. But the struggle of women today, is it any different? Yes, we're talking about past laws, the past books, but the challenges that women face today, is there enough support? Is the support enough to deal with the ever-changing challenges that women are faced with in 2013?
Well, I think our life has become increasingly complicated. We are no longer, if you look at it from a society point of view, we're not an isolated zone geographically. The world is interconnected. We are connecting out within our networks that crosses geographic boundaries, that crosses time zones. We're living in a postmodern society, that's as a nutshell. And in terms of dealing with these complexities, new issues arise. We may overcome old issues, but we've got new issues that arise, and those need to be addressed. And in the same way as our predecessors did, it's about building on that base that they've established, dealing with the issues that we have currently, and in order for the next generation to take advantage over what we've built and developed. So there's always going to be issues, but it's activating our voices, dealing with those issues and addressing them so that it is betterment for the next generation, and helping us as we get through today's society.
Doctor, are we as loud as the women of 1956? Are we as loud in voice? Are we as loud in terms of what we want? Are we as loud in terms of change? Are we loud in terms of equality?
We're probably louder. I think we've got stronger voices. We've already talked about some of the statistics that we've made as breakthroughs from Parliament point of view, from a industry point of view. And if you think of the tools that we've got available to us now as communication tools, especially from a social media perspective or mobile media, these are tools which allow us to amplify our voice. And as we start to build and deliver on our own networks, we in turn communicate with other women, and that has a cascading effect and an effect of empowerment. So I would say, yes, we are loud, but raising the point of looking at aspects where perhaps we need to be more unified in certain areas, because in order to make change, and especially from a democratic point of view, you have to have that critical mass behind you. So you could want to drive one pocket of change in an area, but if you don't have enough volume, the effects that you're going to have may be undermined, but it's driving and achieving your critical mass.
Also singing and dancing there, as you can see the live pictures coming from the Thulamahashe Stadium there in Bushbuckridge. Some great success stories there as well of women conquering in what would be perceived as a male-dominated industry. Sis Togo, great success stories as well.
Absolutely. Those are the role models for our young women in particular, and we should celebrate more and more of those stories and get them out. And thank you, SABC, for making sure that she is seen and heard, so that many more young people who are watching can say, I also want to be like her, and it is possible. That's all that we want to say to our young people, that it is possible. You can conquer the hurdles that you are meeting. Just focus and work hard.
But the challenges are many, Doctor.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, it doesn't. Success doesn't come easy. It is about hard work. It's about perseverance. It's about dedication, and it's also about support structures. You can have your ambition and your desires to go through and achieve and deliver, but you also need to have appropriate support in place to help you to do that. Whether it's assisting with your family, whether it's assisting with after-school activities or helping your children or other means.
but it does depend on support structures. And my fundamental drive on everything is about looking at education, because through education, that is the empowerment of yourself. It gives you the choices. It helps you choose which profession or job you want to go into. Without those choices, you simply don't have a choice. It's looking at the betterment of your family, be it from health choices, from how you're going to choose to educate your children, what environment you want to surround them in, and that is delivered through education as a tool of empowerment. And it also is an area where we can start introducing change, further change into society. We're talking about how we can do change, and I think that this is possibly one area. As it mentioned from our statistics point of view, in higher education, women outrank men, 58% graduates versus 42%. And this is something that we can start utilizing to our advantage in society.
But why do we continue to bear the brunt of poverty and all sorts of injustices within society, if that is the case?
Bearing
the brunt of poverty, particularly in society.
I don't think that that's purely just a woman's burden. I think it's a burden of society. We've got tremendously high unemployment figures. We also have low salaries. On a Stats SA survey, I think it was the January-February 2013 quarterly run, the median earning across South Africa, or the people measured, was only 2,800 Rand a month. And that's the median earnings. And obviously you look at a range going from, I think, about 500 up plus. But poverty is not something that's affecting women in isolation. It's a much bigger picture.
But I think it's our numbers as well. We're in the majority as women, and so we are likely to be the majority that bear the brunt. But I would like to differ slightly and say that if we're in the majority, then we should be in the majority at the top as well. So there's something wrong with society, the way it is structured, the opportunities that have been given. Coming back to the fact that there are more graduating now, where are they? Where are they now in the ladder? Are we tracking as a country in our Human Development Index
then where
to
are
make
these
sure
That's my next
to make
question.
sure that when they enter the job market, they stay there and we're able to support them such that they keep moving, and as they keep moving, we bring more, and society will stabilize. If there's no serious strategy to do that, it's going to be erratic. Government must also plan properly on how to make sure that that is done. And in the private sector, in the public sector, they've done very well in terms of the layers. But private sector is where the difficulty is.
And this is possibly where, again, it's using what we have to our advantage. So if we say that, yes, we've got more graduates, that looking at the level that going into an entry level on a position, as you say, you have to have a minimum qualification. That if you want a managerial position, you have to have a minimum postgraduate qualification. So these are the qualifications, and once we get into that level, men won't be able to argue with women, because the barometer is set to have a degree, or set to have a postgraduate degree to get to the next level. So if we're coming in with the minimum criteria, we're already halfway there. So that's one way of looking at change. And there was an interesting quote from Boris Johnson in the UK in 2007, where he said that far more female graduates are coming out of the British universities than male graduates. And in 30 years' time, when these people reach the peak of their careers, the entire management structure of Britain will have been transformed and feminized. And their ratio is 55% to 45%. We've got a ratio of 58 to 42%. So I think we don't have to wait 30 years to start seeing those changes.
Those changes need to happen now. But we've seen a lot of groups come up and address men and say to men, you need to stand up and be counted against the scourge of violence against women and children. But the educational aspect, I think I want to move to that, of men, to say you need to stand up and be counted. This is what it cannot be accepted by women. This is the way that things are going to happen from now on. Are we seeing quite a lot of that? Are you happy with the way that things are going with regard to that aspect? The education towards men to say that this cannot continue.
I haven't seen statistics, but through observation, if I look at how university students interact at the University of Pretoria, I'd say that it's there. You don't see discrepancies between genders, that there is equality. And obviously, as we were talking about organizations, we also have legislation in place on how people treat one another and what is expected of them. But that's, this is a bigger picture. This is something which has to take effect throughout society, throughout all of our systems and culture, and driving change on, as I said before, it's about rewiring certain aspects and putting in that education on how we decide we want to live.
Sister Well, welcome back. We're broadcasting live from our studios in Auckland Park here in Johannesburg, of course, crossing to the Thulamahashe Stadium where my colleagues Gillian Pillay and Spepile Kunene are there. We're waiting for President Jacob Zuma to come and give his address there, as well as an address that we're expecting there from Lulu Xingwana, the Minister for Women, Children and People with Disabilities. But joining me in studio still here, Dr. Malka from the University of Pretoria, as well as Togo Mpumlwana from the Commission for Gender Equality. Ladies, thanks for staying with us once again. When it comes to women in South Africa and what has been achieved so far, you were talking about a ministry that deals with women, children and people with disabilities. You tend to differ slightly, that perhaps maybe there needs to be a department that deals specifically with women and their issues. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's when everything needs to be flexible in society, that you formulate associations or legislative bodies when you've got particular issues to tackle. And I think until we're at a 50-50 in society, there's a lot of inequality that still needs to be addressed and implemented from a woman's perspective. And I'm not a political body, but it is just interesting that we have a ministry for women, children and people with disabilities.
A heavy load.
I think possibly for the minister, but she would be the best person to communicate that.
All right, Dr. Malka, we'll come back to you very shortly. Thank you very much to my colleague there, Gillian Pillay, who was coming to us from the Thulamahashe Stadium, where the official program is scheduled to get underway any minute now. Let me come back to you, ladies. Let me start with you, Dr. Malka. You were saying it's wonderful to see so many ladies gathered there. There's so much dancing happening, and really, I think trying to, in many ways, many of the guests that my colleagues have spoken to about the role of women, how far women have come, the greater challenges that still are for women to conquer.
Absolutely. It's a celebration of women, and it's not just a case of reflecting on the past, on where we've gone and where we've got to now and where we're going to in the future. But I think we've seen some really fantastic examples of women who have established themselves in their careers, be it political, be it in the public or private sector, particularly the lady who had her transport company, which I believe is called Buscor, male-dominated environment, and rising to the fore. These are ladies who are breaking through the glass ceiling. They're providing the role models that other women need to see, and to be able to aspire to and achieve on what the possibilities of the future are for them.
Sister?
Yes, we indeed celebrate with women today. It's a day really for celebration and for taking more energy for the future, to say we are here and how far do we go now, what do we do as we prepare for the coming generations. And I think young women should really not undermine the importance of such days, because it is these days that will give them the energy to break the cycle of patriarchy and to charter the new areas that they've never gone into, and to see that it is possible to be what you never thought of, because your country has given you the framework to do so. So it is days like this that are important for reflection and celebration.
What should President Jacob Zuma say today, 19 years on? What should he tell women in this country?
Well, I think that's, we'll wait to hear what he's got to say, but I'm sure it'll be an address in terms of looking at where we've come through from the past, the various constitutional rights that we've succeeded in, a reflection on the events that have affected current society, and hopefully looking, what I'd like to see is looking at where we're going to in the future, because I think it's wonderful to reflect on the past, but I think it's more important to look at the future and to look at tangibles and how we can implement things